the way we do things. So perhaps looking at kind of a social enterprise type model, or something that's a little bit more closed loop, where the conservation work that we do actually can generate funding for itself, and we can exponentially grow the funds available for conservation. I just wonder if there's a different way of looking at funding conservation that we're not thinking.
I can just say we've quickly tried some different things, like well, Wildlife Direct was one of the first things when blogs were new. They developed a system where you could give money directly to the field, and donors who cared about the environment were directly linked to people on the ground. So if you gave money, you actually saw the boots in the photo, and a few weeks later, and you felt really good about that. And they were fairly successful at raising additional funds, and that was a whole new stream. And we do the same thing with the EDGE program, where we have EDGE fellows that have to write blogs, put it on the internet. People look at the individual fellows, they get attached to them, then they donate towards those individual fellows, which helps finance it. But it hasn't ramped up to the scale we want. But I think if we get enough content and enough fellows doing amazing things all over the world, that we will hit that point where we'll start to generate additional revenue. Well, those are just two examples of new streams that we've been exploring.
Thank you, Jonathan. In the last 5 minutes, starting with Fred, I want you guys to give us your final thoughts and tell us what your forecast is for species funding. There's been big changes since the last IUCN Congress. We have 2 new funds. The GEF 5 now deals with species. Do we think we're going to have as much change in the positive direction by the time of the next IUCN Congress? Is it getting better, or is it going to be worse?
I'm an optimistic, so I think, and the conservation movement always goes through cycle, and we tend to come back to the fundamentals, and species are one of the fundamental block of nature. So there's been a time where we moved away, but I think I can sense that we are a little bit coming back to some sense, and try to not ignore totally the species and the biodiversity component. So I think the things might get better. I mean, the scale of the problem will probably not change. One of the main factors, rather than the scale, is actually the time frame we have available to act. I think we are fairly aware of the scale of the issues now we are facing. The time frame is something which are shortening. However, I think that for species conservation, I think the things will get better than when they are now. I think there will be more funding available. There will be a different source of funding. We are working on actually increasing our fund, and we've got good hope that it will materialize very, very soon. So I think it will get better. I think we will have a little bit more funding opportunity in the next 4 years.
And I would agree with that, but I think our problem is that the incremental growth in funding, which is what we're experimenting, will not take care of the problem, as we know. And therefore, we need to change the game. We need to go by an order of magnitude higher. We need to actually push the envelope, just like the climate change community has done with climate change financing, and demonstrating again that there are valuable projects that remain unfunded, and that with relatively small amounts of money you can actually produce a lot of good outcomes, and start exploring also some innovative ideas for financing. You mentioned when you asked your question, I recall now the effort with the LifeWeb initiative. I don't know if you're familiar with that, the CBD, which kind of we don't have time to describe this here, but it's kind of a Craigslist for protected areas. So you create that, and you provide a funding environment in which donors can come in, and sometimes they use that to look at, for example, if I am an agency or an NGO that's going to a different place, LifeWeb can tell you, I can help you co-finance this. So if, for example, SOS has more demand than it can meet, it could create a database of recommended projects that could be funded. the number of these small legal funds that people put out. I mean, I'm being sued for whatever reason, so my friends come and put money into a legal fund, and suddenly, you know, you're raising thousands of dollars for certain things. So, I mean, I think we need to be more innovative, and if we truly believe that species are a good conduit for telling the story, I think we haven't fully explored the power of actually bringing money, particularly money in a decentralized way.
Thanks. I would agree. I mean, I think we've seen enough evidence tonight to show that certainly in the international community, donors are becoming more sensitized to the need for species funding, and I think that that's obviously a move in the right direction. I would also agree that our own organization worries about the timelines we have left. I mean, we have a number of species, and I've got bored hearing myself say this, but a number of very large charismatic species, I'm not even talking invertebrates here, who, if the same number of rhino that were poached last year applied to these species, they'd be extinct in our country in 1 year. So we've got species that are heading towards precipitous declines, and one just wonders if there is that time scale, because I completely agree with you, Simon. I think that long-term funding is the answer, even if it's not the amounts we want, it's the commitment that allows one to plan. And I worry sometimes that we don't have that chance left for a number of species, but the opportunities to be addressing species in crisis are opening up to us. I do, however, think that it's a little bit problematic because donors are squeezed, you're getting thousands of proposals, you're limited, and so the obvious ones that float to the top are the ones that are in crisis. Now, those are the ones that do need the help, obviously, but I think my concern is how do we stop other species from getting to that point? And, you know, if we're only focusing on the 10 that we're about to lose, and as important as that is, I just think we're often missing, and that's the communication we need to start, is how do we prevent a lot of other species from getting into the same situation. And so I think the donor community is moving in the right direction. I think the challenge lies with us, those spending the money, to be able to be very clear about how we prioritize species conservation ourselves, and where we put limited resources at the end of the day. And I think that's a very complex question that none of us have right, but we need to match that with where donors are going in order to really be effective over the long term. But I think the move certainly in the last couple of years is in the right direction. And just to finish off, my organization was started 40 years ago. It's called the Endangered Wildlife Trust. In the last few years, we've probably done 40% of species conservation. We've been doing ecosystems and all the other right things because, you know, not only because it was the right thing to do, but you almost hung your head in shame if you were a species conservation organization 10 years ago. That's how it was. And now, you know, we're proud to say that we're one of the leaders of that in our area, and people are embracing that. So there's certainly a change in the conservation community, and I think as much as we are